I'm looking at a TeamDynamix knowledge base article titled Getting Started with Core Integrations.
Yes.
You guys see my screen? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So the core integrations is probably the most technical part of the tool. And so we're going to go over a couple of these pieces. They're not necessarily all interrelated, but they usually touch on things like emails, the single sign-on folks, that type of stuff. So there's really three primary pieces here. And so it says four. The fourth one is optional. Most people, I'd probably say, don't do, but you certainly can. And that is, we'll start at the bottom. So there is an SMTP server, or if you have an outgoing SMTP server, you can change the email address or the display name of emails sent from the tool, right? So there are a number of email notifications that the tool automatically sends out when tickets are created, tickets are updated, project requests, people can be notified on certain things on projects and project requests. All of those get captured in a email format and get sent out. The SMTP server part of that means you can change what it looks like or the display name so it looks more like it's coming from Imperial. So people have changed the color of the box that the email comes in and make it look like it's coming from Imperial College as opposed to the blue from TeamDynamix. So that is an option that you can do. I'll send you more information on that in my notes today. And if you decide to do that, there's instructions on how to do that in that note. But that's probably I'd probably say the least common one here. The other three are what we're going to cover today. We are going to go over these at a high level and give you a little bit of probably some homework and follow-up items that we have to have before we can turn these things on. And we may have to have follow-up discussion with my technical team if you run into any technical questions or we do any sort of deep technical dive on any of these things. But today I'll be able to give you a high level of what we're talking about. So authentication. Right now, for the folks that are set up in the tool as a user, right? We created you as users. And we did that manually. We went in to the admin, we created a user, we gave you guys a security role, and we gave you access to applications. And for some or all of you, we also, in addition to getting a security role and giving you application access, you also got administrator privileges, right? So you have access to the TD admin part of the tool to be able to build and create things in the tool and do all of this setup. However, so right now you guys are authenticating manually through your username, which is your email address, and your password, which we probably set, test 1, 2, 3 or something simple like that. Then you reset it to whatever you want. So it's pretty rare, but occasionally folks will just keep that manual authentication method into the TeamDynamix tool. They'll just use their email and whatever manual password that they have. 98% of our customers, I would say, maybe even more than that, configure authentication so that they leverage your single sign-on credentials, right? And so that's what the authentication piece we'll talk about, is setting up single sign-on. One of the first things that they'll ask is that, are you a member of InCommon? Does that ring a bell? The InCommon network? Does that ring a bell for anybody?
No.
We're not really part of that, but it would just be the SAML single sign-on that we'd be looking for.
Oh, okay. So all the InCommon one does is that's a national network of some higher education customers, and their metadata is stored in an accessible area. And so for some of our customers are part of that in-common network, and if they are, it just means we have easier access to their metadata. That's the only reason that I asked. So we'll talk about authentication and what we'll have to do to get that set up. Each of these, so this is the overview article, right? And then each of these you can click on for more specific on how to do that specific setup. But I'm going to circle back to authentication. We're going to talk about the email service. So you guys we're doing both the PPM and the ITSM implementation for you. So we'll want to set up 2 services for you, probably one right now and one later on after we get your ticket implementation close to being ready to go live. So the first one is the email replies. The email replies, what that means is, again, going back to those email notifications that get sent out from the TeamDynamix tool, right? Somebody creates a ticket, they can have an email notification from the tool sent to them or an update on the ticket. That email coming from TeamDynamix would land in someone's inbox, right? So let's say the tool emailed Jeff. So the TeamDynamix, he would get this message inside a blue box from the tool, and as of today, if Jeff were to reply back to that email, so email reply, there is not a hook or a connector between your Outlook and back into the TeamDynamix tool, right? So Jeff's reply would go back to the person that generated that email. So if it were me, if I were updating a ticket and Jeff was the person I was updating the ticket on, and I was updating it in the tool and sending an email notification to him, Jeff would reply back to that, and it would come to me directly, to my direct email, as opposed to that reply going back into the tool, into the appropriate place to be able to see Jeff's reply in the tool. So this sentence here probably says it better than what I just did. TeamDynamix sends email notifications out. You may want people's replies to these notifications to feed back into TeamDynamix. If so, that would be setting up this email replies service. The second thing that this email service can do, that we typically wait and set up down the road, is the email monitor. And the email monitor sets up an email address that can turn emails into tickets. So you publicize a help desk ticketing email to your end users and say, hey, you can submit tickets by clicking this link and sending an email here, and it will automatically create that from the email. So it monitors the email for specific words and then creates a specific ticket based on that information and the rules, and that's just set up for that email monitor. So today we'll get a chance to get looking at this email replies. And like I said, for the email monitor, we'll have to do that a little bit later on, because you don't want to be turning tickets. You don't want to be turning emails into tickets right now until your tool is configured. Then the biggest chunk is people import, right? So people import. People records, typically user records, are created for all of your potential users in the tool. And that's usually into, at higher education, it can be into the thousands of users, right? Especially on the ticket. On the project side, you probably aren't going to get that many people. But on the ticketing side, if students, faculty, and staff are going to be submitting tickets through your client portal, then you could have potentially thousands of what we would call client license users who only have access to the client portal, as well as other users in the tool, and you could import them in one big bang people import, and or continue to do nightly or weekly updates of your user records, right? So that's the people import, creating people in your tool. And that is an area that we'll go over. That one typically takes the longest. There's a lot that goes into the people import as far as where it's done, how it's done. It leverages the your web API capabilities on your side of the house. So we'll talk about that. I think the easiest one, or let me just pause to see if you have any general questions overall on anything I've covered so far. If I've confused you, or is this making sense?
No questions.
All right. So we're going to start with number 2, the email replies. All honesty, that's probably the simplest one. For Jonathan and Omar, are you guys registered with the TeamDynamix community site? Does that ring a bell? And the reason that I say that is in my notes that I send to you today, to get a couple of things we want to make sure is that you have access to these knowledge base articles so that you can follow through and read them. But to get access to them, you need to be registered in our community site.
Yeah, I think it would be Jeff and Omar. This is Jonathan. I was the one that went through it with you last week.
Okay, excellent. All right. So I just want to make sure my notes, I usually send links, and I want to make sure if you click on a link, you'll just log in and you know how to log in and be ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, we can walk them through it. So.
And then the other thing we'd probably want to do inside your interface is to potentially set up Jonathan and Omar as admins, even if it's just temporarily while they do these configurations in the tool. And you could always leave them as admins, or you can take them out as admins at some point. So I clicked into number 2, which is the email service, which comprises of 2 things: email replies, which we're going to start building today, and then you can read through the creating tickets with the email monitors. We'll do that down the road for once we get into your ticketing application and start building things out over there. So first thing first on the email replies is that we need to set up in your environment, you need to set up an address that you want to use for email replies in your environment, such as tdreplies@imperial.edu, whatever it might be. So you set that up first. So you guys would need to do that. Some people do it now while we're on the phone. Some people take it away as homework. But once you set that up, it does need to be an IMAP enabled mailbox that receives emails sent to this address that you create. And then you guys would need to set up your username and password, know your address and port, that sort of thing. And then the mailbox needs to have 3 folders within it for successful an inbox, a process, or unsuccessful. And I'll show you where we do this in the tool here in a second. So these items here, 1 through 3, are set up internally inside your environment right here. And I'll show you where that is done and where that's mapped to in TeamDynamix. The 4th one here is a TeamDynamix user account called email service, typically, or email replies, needs to be set up, and I'm going to help you do that today. So we're going to jump out of that KB article there, and we are going to, I have admin privileges into your environment, and I'm going to go into your TD admin area, right? And in here, I am going to look inside organization settings, which we moved around our email replies. Right here. Used to be under org settings, and it got pulled out. Now it's under its own. So email replies is what we're going to work on today. So that 1 through 3 on this page, this will talk about setting it up. We're going to want to select these 2 checkboxes here that will open up this. So number 1, that email you guys create, once you have it created, you would enter it here. These settings here would all be your settings. This would be the monitored folder. So again, these this is typically your inbox, processed, unsuccessful for failure. An error to email usually goes to a generic email inbox or to somebody specifically. This is usually only used for a catastrophic failure on our end to be able to notify you. It's pretty rare that that would happen, but that would be an error to email. And then the run interval on when this would be running, it's defaulted to 10 minutes, but you can lower it to 5, which I would recommend. Down here is where we'd have to create, this would be, so these items here are the 1 through 3 we just saw back in that article. So that's 1 through 3 here. 4 is what I'm going to show you now, which is the TeamDynamix settings. So from here down, we need to create a fake user in the tool called email replies, and then up the password. And then you just need to determine what you want to do if the monitor doesn't contain a reply token. Do you want it to move it to the unsuccessful folder and just have it sit there or do nothing? Usually it's moved to unsuccessful. And then the same thing for unprocessed that are older than a week. That's usually defaulted to that. Down here under attachments, usually most likely you want to enable those so that if Jeff wanted to send an attachment back with his reply, you could. So that's usually enabled. And then comments, public, private, typically public is fine there. So about the only thing you'd want to do is enable the attachments. So questions on this top portion, which you guys would have to set up, that reply to address, the authenticating account, and then these, again, these are folders. These need to be top level folders. They can't be subfolders. Any questions on this top part here? Does this look simple enough, or is this a little bit
So the email address can be any email address we want to come up with?
correct? We give you an example, usually like reply to, like in this article here, td-replies at imperial.edu, but whatever you want to name it, just so you remember what the name is. Then you obviously remember, you know the authentication settings, and then the folder structure.
So the reply and the monitor are 2 separate email addresses. Right?
Yes,
Or are they just,
this is your email address, and this one down here is that fake user we'll set up. Correct. The email monitor, right, that we'll do down the road, that would be another, it could be the same address, but to limit the confusion, a lot of times people will create a second one. And so the first one would be TD replies, and maybe the second one is TD monitors.
yeah.
But it definitely could be the same, but sometimes people like to separate the two. So what I can do for you today is create this user password. You guys can jot that down. And then when you have this top portion ready to go, you can populate everything. And then what you do is you just hit the save button. If you don't get any error messages over here, you are good to go, and the email replies is set up correctly. You can always check the logs too. If you are getting error messages, it'll give you a little bit of what that is, but you can check the logs too, and that might give you a little bit more details. So I am going to come back over here in your users and roles, and I'm going to create a fake user. The only thing you'll have to jot down is the password, and you guys can reset this password if you want to. So I'm going to create a user, and I'm going to call this email replies at Imperial. I'm going to copy that because I need it in a couple of spots. I do need to give it a security role. This does not count towards your licensing amount, because when we do our audit, we know that there has to be a couple of fake users set up for the email replies and the email monitor. So our auditors will cancel out these, and it will not count towards your paid licenses. First name is going to be email. Second name is going to be replies. And it does this weird copy here. And for the password, I'm just going to use test123. Again, test123 lowercase. I do need to put in that fake username here for both of these because these are required. And I'm going to deselect these boxes here. So did somebody catch that password, test123, for that user?
Yeah.
All right. I want to give them application access just to make sure that nothing funny goes on. I can deselect these two here. Actually, no, I want to, just to be safe. It's better to be safe than sorry. Just turn them off, turn everything on. Now, in preparation for a couple of months down the road, or a couple of weeks down the road when we're working on tickets, I'm just going to go ahead and create your other user for that email monitor. And this one is going to be email monitor. And we'll just use this one down the road as well. I'm going to do the same thing. Give it the email monitor. Blow that out. I'm going to give it this same password. Test123. Test123. I'm going to go down and make sure I populate my fake email and deselect these. Finish. All right, so that's almost done. And then I'm going to select all, turn these on. All right, got those two fake users set up for you guys to use. So if we go back into email replies, so now let's pretend you guys created that, all of those 1, 2, 3, right? You guys went and did 1, 2, 3 here. Then simply you're going to come back here. You're going to check these two boxes to open up. You're going to put in your email reply to address, your auth account, what you want your top level folders to be named. If there's an email, like a help desk or email address here, switch this to 5. Type in email replies at imperial.edu, test 1, 2, 3, or whatever you happen to change it to. Test 1, 2, 3. Enable attachments and hit save, and you should be good to go. Questions?
No.
Okay. So just to tie a bow on email monitors, again, we'll do it down the road, but I just want to show you that it's in a different place because you can have multiple ticketing applications, thus you could have multiple ticketing email services, right? So inside your ticket application, now you'll see this email again over here, and that's where your email monitors get set up. So email monitors, they'll look very similar. Once we set things up in here, we'll leverage. We have our user created now, email monitors here, and the test 1, 2, 3 password down the road. Everything else will be very similar. Again, you could use that same account, but it's advisable to use a separate one. And then from here, once you do this part here, it's almost identical to what you're going to do on email replies. But from here, you can come over and set rules on how the email is looking for what type of tickets it's turning it into based on the subject line. But we'll go over this again in detail down the road once we start getting close to your ticket implementation. Alrighty, that's this one we just covered, the email service, the replies. We are going to back out of this article and we are going to talk about authentication. So again, from authentication, click on the Getting Started with the Authentication guide. There'll be a wealth of information in here. And you can see one of the reasons that I asked, are you an in-common member? Simply because that allows us to get access to your metadata already. Now, I think somebody had mentioned you guys are using SAML.
Yeah, that's
Does
correct.
that sound about right?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you guys also using Shibboleth or ADFS?
It's Portal Guard.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
can you say that again?
It's
Go
a
ahead.
product named Portal Guard.
Oh, Portal Guard, okay. This is where I start getting into the weeds a little bit, where I haven't heard that one term before. But SAML is certainly supported here. The first thing that we would need, and going through this article, you can read a lot of the details here, but the first step in setting up authentication is that we, TeamDynamix, would need to know your metadata URL. And sometimes folks have that and can put it in the chat and send it to me. What I would do with that is I would send it to my technical team, and they would, it typically takes a couple of days, especially with tomorrow being a Friday, they would upload it or download the metadata. So first step is that you would need to find your metadata and send it to me. then we would need to download that, and we would also need your oh, here's your metadata right here. Oh, very good. I'll copy that. Hang on one second. I'll have to submit a ticket and send that over. Again, it might take a couple of days. The other thing we need is your scope, right? So your scope is for sure at imperial.edu, right? But then I have to ask, are there other scopes that you leverage other than that one that could be tied into people's single sign-on credentials at all?
Well, I know a lot of it comes down to how you're fully configuring it. I know with the state, even though we have at students.imperial.edu for our students, they required us to continue using at imperial.edu for those in terms of how they were scoping things on their end. Like they could only have like one domain or one piece there.
Oh, okay.
But generally, I'm assuming with you guys, you should have maybe more flexibility. So on the student side, I mean, their usernames are going to have, or email addresses are going to have at students.imperial.edu in them. So if we could have two separate ones,
perfect.
That would be good.
Yeah, that's what I need then. Could you say that again? At student?
Students plural.
Students.
Yeah.
So it's at students imperial.edu, did you say?
At students.imperial.edu, yep.
All right, I'm going to paste this back in the chat so you can confirm it. Make sure I didn't do any typos. Does that look right? Or is it students?
No, that's
imperial. Correct. That's right? Okay, perfect. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, oftentimes there are multiple scopes. I was at, prior to this, I was a customer of TeamDynamix, and we had like 3 or 4 scopes. It was ridiculous. And I was at Madison College. We were also Madison Area Technical College, MATC, and so all of those were like part of our and it was a pain to track, that's for sure. For legacy students and faculty and staff, they had multiple ones. But so at imperial.edu and at students.imperial.edu. Okay, so I got that. So I'll submit that. That will take a couple of days. So you'll have to wait to hear back from me that that has been downloaded on our end. Once that is done, essentially what you're going to be doing is reading this part here and walking through the SSO. And I'm going to walk you through what you're going to do after I tell you that we've downloaded your metadata and your scopes. So I'm going to come back over here in your TD admin interface. I'm going to come back to your name and back to your main page on here. And from here, we'll see security. I'm going to click on that. And then we'll see this green configure SSO. When I click on that, you'll be able to enter in your entity ID, which is mandatory, obviously. There is an after logout URL you could populate in here. It's optional, but defines the URL that the user will be redirected to after they have logged out. So this one for sure, potentially this one, and then check this box here. Once you do that, you select the Enable SSO, and if you don't get any errors at that instant, any current user will be able to authenticate into TeamDynamix using your single sign-on credentials. Right, so your current users right now are these 18. Well, there's 18, but there's also a couple fake ones, so there's 16 or so real people in here. So then everybody in here would be able to authenticate in using, no longer using their manual credentials, but using their Imperial single sign-on. So again, I'll walk through that again. I'm going to submit a ticket with your metadata and your scopes. We're going to download those. I'm going to let you know that that is completed, that you can continue with your SSO configuration. You're going to come back to TD admin, go into the security, configure SSO, fill out these, hit the green enable SSO. I would hit the save first, but then hit enable SSO. And should be good to go. Questions? Any of the underpinnings, if you're interested in what's happening, are here or potentially over here in the related articles.
So for any user,
more detail there.
So for any user who's not part of that list, do they need to be added to the list in order to have access?
That is going to be part of the people import conversation.
Oh.
This one here. Yep. So right now so let me pause there before I start talking about people import. Just in general, from an authentication perspective, are you feeling pretty good about order of operations? You're going to wait to hear back from me on your metadata and your scopes being downloaded, and then you can proceed with those a couple of settings.
Yeah, I think that part's fine. I think there's still a little bit of a question of what setup is required on the PortalGuard side in terms of attributes and whatnot, but maybe there's a separate document that goes over that.
Yeah, while you're waiting to hear back from me, feel free to peruse through this article here, as well as this overview would probably be helpful too. So it leaves us about 18 minutes to talk about people import. Again, this is probably the longest process that we're going to be going through, and this we may have to have several conversations about the people import. So right now, your 18 people have been manually entered, right? And you might want to manually enter a few more key people, and feel free to do so at any time. The people import is usually used for bulk importing your students, faculty, and staff, so they can access the tool as a client and submit tickets for the help desk, right? So the people import is going to talk about the records that we're creating with the people as part of the import itself. So the records that we're going to be importing are user records. We're not going to import customer records. We are going to import user records because those cover all three of the types of people that are going to be in your tool. People are going to come in four flavors. A client license, right? Who can only access the tool for the client portal. Again, primarily students, faculty, and staff. A technician license, which are help desk technicians and or project people that are going to be working on projects. And all of those certainly can access the client portal, but more importantly can access the other part of the tool that they'll be using on a day-to-day basis, that part of the tool called TD And then the third is enterprise people, who could access both of those areas. And then on top of that, the enterprise people can be given additional admin privileges to access TD admin, which is part of the tool where I've been showing you where the setup is done. Again, a lot of times the enterprise folks and or technicians are set up manually, but they can certainly be included in the people import. So you can either have a full-blown import that is importing both client licensed people and technicians and enterprise all in one import, or some people like to break it up and do one for clients and one for other types of users. So I'm going to walk you through what's going to happen in the tool, kind of a high-level overview here. Like I said, this is probably the most technically complex, and it does require, understanding the web API capabilities that you guys would leverage on your end. So this is typically the people import is done leveraging APIs, right? And so this is just a visual aid to kind of show us what's going on. And all of this is really happening in your environment with some connectors to obviously TeamDynamix as well. So I'm going to talk about these three as blocks: block 1, block 2, block 3, and what's happening here. And then the supporting documentation down here in the related articles that relate to block 3 and block 2. So wherever your people data is stored, and we've given some examples, obviously, PeopleSoft, AD, Workday, so on and so forth, you guys are going to query that information from where that's stored, and then you're going to create your own file, and it's got to be in one of these formats, right? XLSX, XLS, or a CSV file. You're going to then drop that into a secure directory in your environment, in your infrastructure. And then typically for an ongoing basis, it's certainly done initially as a big bang, but then it can be done on a nightly or weekly basis to update records periodically, however often you need it to do that. So that's the block 1, and I'll show you what the columns are needed to be populated for this file here in just a minute. But that's block 1. I want to pause there, see if you have any questions on that yet.
I don't think so.
No, so far so good? Okay. So block 2 is where most of the magic happens, right? So it's going to monitor your directory that you specify for the file. But first, you're going to want to download the utility from TeamDynamix, right? So this block 2 corresponds with this related article here. So you see the word utility here, download the utility. Where do you download it from? From right in here. Using the TeamDynamix people import utility, it's got the utility word in it if you forget which of these articles. So block 2 here, to download that utility, the instructions are in here in this utility article. Then that will monitor the directory that you specify, and that utility will make 2 API calls, a first post and then a second post. So this is where the actual wizardry happens in block 2. Then, from an ongoing API endpoint perspective, block 3 happens, right? This block here, this endpoint receives the import file, stores it for batch processing at a fixed non-peak time. So let me talk about that for a second. The first, we're going to want to do this import once you get this file, right? You want to do it in the sandbox first, so that you can check the data and make sure everything's looking good. You can do that sandbox import at any time, and depending on how many records that's coming in, it might take a little bit of time in the sandbox. You know, if it's thousands of records, it might take, you know, an hour or two, depending on how many records there are. But when you do it in production, it will be done in non-peak times, so it'll be done overnight, so it's not impacting anything else. So just an FYI there. We certainly want to do the first people import in sandbox, check the data, and then do rinse and repeat in your production interface. So that's where it's saying here non-peak hours. It's assuming that you're doing this eventually in production. So when this endpoint receives the file, the record is brand new. It'll create the record. If it's a copy, it will update the previously created record with any new data for that particular user record. And then, of course, as I mentioned, importing the sandbox first. So the API that this one's referencing is the first one in the related article here. So the web API people import API sync between your organization and TeamDynamix. That's what's happening in this third block here. So far, so good. So let's go back to block 1 and talk about this file that you have to create, right? The third bullet point here. So you're going to create a blank file in one of these formats. The columns and the column headers and the data you're going to be looking for is going to be in your TD admin under let's see, where do we put that now? Users and roles, because we're doing users, import jobs. So again, let me go back over that. TD admin, it used to be under org settings, but we moved it under users and roles, import jobs. There's nothing here. However, there's magic behind this help button here. This help button is going to give us the information you need to use to populate your spreadsheet. So standard fields, I'm going to talk through the true and false of what those columns need to have. And down here are the headers. This would be the file header, right? So if you created that XLSX spreadsheet, if you wanted to create a user and have them already have a defaulted account department on their user record, you would need account department as the header of one of the columns in there, exactly how it's spelled here. It's not required, but I'll talk about why you may want that. The account department is a required field on tickets and project requests. If there's not one listed on a user record, then the requester will just have to select from a drop-down of your existing account department and pull that in. So this is just a good way to already have it populate based on the default account department that should be associated with that user record. These restrictions column here will tell you what's required if it's used for creation only. So anything that has a blank in here obviously is not required. We are going to be creating user records only, so the description gives a very good description of each of these potential file headers that you need here. Now, for those that were on the very first call we had, this will look very similar to the user record that we manually created. We skipped over a lot of this because we don't have a bill rate for a lot of things, or cost rates for people. It's sometimes not leveraged. The address. So a lot of this looks very similar when we go in to create a user, right? So when we created Angie, right, it's all of these fields in here are what we're seeing. Here's that default account department. And then alternate email. So it's all of these fields is what we're seeing here. So if you're looking at it going, oh goodness, it's stuff that you would have either skipped over or populated manually. Now you're just able to do it by pulling that information from your data source and populating that field if you need to populate it. So the fields is creating that spreadsheet for the fields you want to capture in here, and there's quite a few, but again, it's very similar to what we did on your manual user records, right? And then remember, there's a two-part process when we did it manually. For those that were on the call the first time when we created those users, that you created the user record with the license type, the security role, right, which is right here. It's always required. So that's that security role. So that's the first prong. And then the next is that you have to select the applications that you want the user to have access to, right? So when we created manually Angie's user record, we gave her a security role, and then we filled out some basic information in here, but all of these fields are part of those standard fields that you can populate as part of your import. So that was the first thing we did. We saved it, and then remember we went over to applications and we gave her access to all of these applications. That's what we're doing, or that's what you're going to be doing for that spreadsheet as well. Back over under import jobs in the help on your spreadsheet is standard applications. So for your client license folks, there is very little that they'll need access to here. These are primarily for your technicians and above, right? And here would be the import header, the column header, and then you're going to be populating. You'd want to have all of these as a column in your spreadsheet. And then for the individual users, you're going to be putting in true or false if they need that. So the homework on here is to begin to populate your people import XLS spreadsheet. Go through the standard fields, as well as the applications. Build out the columns you need to fill out, and then we can review this spreadsheet before you do a sandbox import and make sure everything's looking copacetic.
I think James has got this all covered.
Is that right, James? Was that tongue in cheek, or were you being serious there?
Yeah, he's tongue in cheek. No, I was just texting. I was texting Jonathan. I'm glad he's doing this part, not me.
Yeah, do we have some man hours for this?
Yeah, that's be easy. I think actually with the 50 users, I mean, the biggest thing will be the just the users, just ones opening tickets.
The clients.
Client side, yeah.
Yeah. So often for the primary users, your technicians, your project people, your managers, it's quick and simple to just manually create, even if it's 50 records, right? You could probably kick out another 20, 30 records here in about half hour, right?
Yeah.
It's those clients, right? It's the clients, your students, faculty, and staff, that you want to use the import on to keep things up to date, right? And if that's the case, then the spreadsheet's not as daunting, right? Because then primarily you're going to be just filling out the standard applications for your client license folks, right? That's going to be a little bit easier. And from there, you're probably just going to want, your spreadsheet's not going to have 56 columns on it. It's probably going to have accounts departments and then the mandatory fields that are needed for it. So if you're going to do like the client import, and you don't have to there's no time frame on this import other than literally other than when you go live with your tickets application, and you communicate out to your broad audience that, hey, we have this new ticket application. So this doesn't have to be done in the next week or couple weeks even. It can be, you guys got all kinds of other work you're working on too. So you can kind of poke at it and get work on it. But once this file is done, then you're following the block. You're following this and doing 1, 2, and 3 from a utility perspective. And then with that said, if you get stuck in any of this, you can reach out to me. I can get my technical resources on a call with you and walk through any hangups that you might be struggling with.
Sounds good.
So I'll send you my notes today, and then I'll just check in with the team periodically on how you guys are doing on these items. I'll certainly, I already have your metadata in your scope. I'll submit that for, and then I'll let you know when that has been completed, and then you can continue with the SSO configuration.
Okay.
Sound good?
Sounds good. Sounds good. I'll need this video so I can watch it again when I'm doing that thing, in case I get lost.
Yeah, I'll send my notes with this recording as part of that, and then we'll just take it step by step.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye now.